The year was 1900. The wind howled low across the North Atlantic, and the waves crashed like ancient beasts against the jagged rocks of Eilean Mor, a forgotten speck in the sea where nothing lived, and nothing dared linger for long. It was cold, lifeless, remote, the kind of place that swallowed voices and kept secrets buried under centuries of silence. 3 men stood on the deck of the relief vessel as it neared the island. Thomas Marshall, the eldest and most disciplined James Ducat, strong but distant, and Donald MacArthur, the youngest, full of nervous energy and barely hiding his unease. The lighthouse loomed in the distance like a ghostly tower piercing the fog, its stone walls blackened by salt and time. There was no smoke, no birds, no sound, just stillness, broken only by the sea. As the boat approached the island's small dock, the men joked loudly to mask the weight in their chests. Donald laughed a little too hard at Thomas's dry humor. James lit a pipe with shaking hands. The lighthouse stood watching them, tall, expressionless, ancient as if it had seen many come before and not all had left. The captain, an old sailor with weathered eyes, helped them unload their gear. As they stepped off the boat, he gave them a strange look, half smile, half warning. "Write to us if the island writes back first," he muttered, his voice low, almost serious. The men chuckled. Donald raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? But the captain didn't answer. He just turned, boarded the ship, and vanished into the fog with a blast of the horn, leaving the 3 men alone on an island that didn't seem quite empty. The door to the lighthouse creaked as they opened it. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Their boots echoed off the stone floor. Something about the silence felt wrong, like the walls were listening. They had no idea they would never leave this place again. Not alive. Maybe not even dead. The first few nights passed in quiet routine. The men split their shifts, kept the light burning, logged the weather, and ate in silence. The island remained still, cold, unmoving. The fog curled around the windows like fingers, and the wind whispered low against the stone walls like someone breathing just beyond the glass. But nothing strange happened. Not yet. On the 4th night, something changed. James Ducat was on the midnight shift when he paused at the base of the spiral staircase. He tilted his head slightly, squinting upward. Footsteps soft, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking above him. He froze. His lantern flickered. He called out Thomas, but there was no reply. He climbed the stairs, heart pounding, only to find the upper landing empty. The beacon still spun lazily in the tower. The air was heavy, damp. No one was there. He checked every corner. The next morning, Donald stood outside, staring into the heavy mist that rolled across the sea like a curtain. Thomas walked out, sipping coffee, and saw him frozen. "Donald," he asked, "what are you looking at?" Donald didn't move. His voice was thin when he finally spoke. "There's someone out there in the fog." A figure dark and tall stood motionless at the edge of the cliff, just beyond the lighthouse grounds. No features, no movement, just standing, watching. And then, like it was never there, it vanished, with the next wave of fog. That night, Thomas opened the logbook and wrote, "The winds whisper. I feel them inside the walls." James says he hears footsteps above. Donald saw someone in the mist. "I checked the grounds. No one there. Nothing makes sense here." But something was there. Something that didn't leave footprints. Something that didn't belong to this world, and it had begun watching them, patiently. By the 7th day, something in the air had changed. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt loaded, like the island itself was holding its breath. The men, once joking and talkative, now barely spoke. They passed each other in narrow corridors with lowered eyes, muttering under their breath as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. Thomas stopped eating. James would sit at the table for hours, just staring at the fog outside. Donald began scribbling strange symbols in his notebook, crossing them out violently. Their dinners sat untouched. Coffee turned cold. They slept less. They listened more. And then the clock stopped. Not once, but 3 nights in a row at exactly 8:45 p.m. They would reset it, check the mechanism, replace the batteries, still at 8:45, tick, tick, silence. But what chilled them the most was what they began to hear. Knocking, soft, repetitive. Not from the door, not from the windows, from below. At first, they thought it was the foundation settling. Then maybe sea waves. But the knocks came in patterns, slow, deliberate, like code. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. 1. Thomas finally said what they were all thinking. The lighthouse doesn't have a basement. They checked anyway, every trapdoor, every floorboard, every pipe. Nothing. Yet the knocking returned every night, always from underneath their feet. Donald, sleep-deprived and pale, finally wrote in the logbook, "It's not the sea. It's not the wind. Something wants us out. Or wants in. And I think it's almost here." James stared at him for a long time after he finished writing. Thomas didn't say a word, but that night, the knocking turned into scratching, and it came from behind the walls. By the 10th day, the island no longer felt like part of this world. The fog had thickened to the point that even daylight couldn't cut through it. It wrapped the lighthouse in a cocoon of gray silence, turning hours into days and days into something that couldn't be counted anymore. Thomas, once the leader, now barely spoke. James had locked himself in the storeroom for 2 nights straight, muttering prayers under his breath. Donald. He stopped sleeping altogether. He just stood at the window, every night motionless, staring out into the black ocean like something out there had called his name, and he was waiting for it to return. They logged the weather, out of habit. Thomas wrote of raging storms, of waves slamming against the rocks, of the tower shaking as thunder cracked overhead. But when the rescue station on the mainland checked their records, there were no storms, not even wind. The skies had been clear the entire week. Then came the final logbook entry. Just a single sentence. Written in jagged, shaking handwriting by Thomas himself, Donald stands at the window all night. He says the sea is staring back. There were no further entries, no follow-up report, no closing signature. The pen was found lying beside the open book, ink still fresh as if someone had been interrupted. Mid-sentence, mid-thought, mid-scream. When the search team arrived days later, the clock was stopped. The table was still set, and Donald's chair was facing the window, but Donald wasn't there. None of them were, only the sea remained watching. The sea was calm when the relief ship finally approached Eilean Mor, several days overdue. The men on board had received no signals, no updates, and no flicker from the lighthouse beam. At first they assumed the equipment had malfunctioned, but deep down, a quiet dread had begun to form. As the ship neared the dock, the lighthouse stood like a grave marker in the fog. Still lifeless. Not a single sound came from the island. Not a gull, not a wave. Just silence, thick, unnatural silence. The rescue crew climbed the rocky path to the lighthouse entrance, calling out Thomas, James, Donald. No answer. Just the low hum of the wind circling the tower like it was whispering their names back. They reached the front door. It was locked from the inside. The team exchanged glances, confused, concerned. They forced it open with iron tools, splintering the thick wood. The moment they stepped inside, they were struck by the cold. Not the chill of winter, but the kind of cold that felt like it was alive. Watching inside, the fireplace had long gone out. Ash lay undisturbed in the hearth. The table was set for a meal that was never eaten, plates still full, spoons beside them. Cups of untouched tea sat in silence, their surfaces smooth as glass. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no storm damage. The beds were made, pillows untouched, blankets folded, as if the men had never slept at all or had never returned to sleep again. But what truly chilled the rescuers was the dining room. 3 chairs surrounded the table. 2 were pushed in neatly, but one chair had been pushed back. Just slightly, as if someone had stood up in a hurry mid-meal and then vanished into thin air. No footsteps, no notes, no signs of escape. Just that single chair and a silence so deep, it rang in their ears like a scream. Whatever happened here, it didn't leave behind answers. It left behind a void, and that void was still waiting for someone to notice it. The search began with precision. The entire lighthouse was swept room by room, but the deeper they looked, the deeper the madness set in. There were no signs of departure. Not a single footprint outside the door, no scuffed mud. No trail on the wet grass, no handprints on the iron rails. The cliffside was calm. The boats, all 3, were still tied to the dock. Not a rope out of place, not a knot undone. They never left, at least not by sea. But then, something odd. A check in the coat room revealed a detail so simple, so haunting. It silenced the men in an instant. 1 raincoat was missing. Just 3 men. 2 coats. No one would have gone outside without one. The island was a storm-blasted death trap. But here's where the story twisted into madness. The logbook recorded a storm, roaring waves, screaming winds. But the weather reports from nearby stations, clear skies. No storm that night. So then why would one man leave into a storm that didn't exist wearing a coat? And why would the other two follow? Unprotected, leaving everything behind, the rescuers stood frozen in the main hall. The unchanged meal still on the table. The missing coat. The locked door from inside, the silent island with no escape. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was a vanishing wrapped in madness, stitched into the silence like a scream no one could hear. 3 men, no signs, no clues, just a whisper in the wind and a chair that never stopped rocking. They say the sea never lies, but the island remembers. In the weeks that followed the disappearance, whispers began spreading like mold through the nearby coastal village. Old fishermen with dead eyes warned the young that island was never meant for men. It was cursed long before the lighthouse ever stood. An ancient tale, nearly forgotten, was spoken again in hushed voices over dim candlelight, a legend buried in time. Once every 100 years, the sea demands a price. The island calls, and 3 souls vanish to calm the ocean's fury. If no one listens, the sea takes more. The elders claim the fog that surrounds the lighthouse is not fog at all. It's the breath of the drowned, rising every century to reclaim the living. And now, the proof was undeniable. No birds ever flew near that rock again. No seals basked on its shores, no life, no sound. Not even the wind dared to pass through its tower. Sailors changed course by miles just to avoid its silhouette. The mere shape of the island in moonlight was said to drive men to nightmares. Locals began to call it something new, the Whispering Island. Because when the wind blew just right, you could still hear them. The 3 calling from the sea, begging not to be taken. But it was too late. They were part of the legend now, and the lighthouse just a monument to the ones who were never meant to return. Weeks had passed, the case was closing. Files were being shelved as unsolved, but then something arrived. A sealed yellowed envelope, damp as if kissed by sea mist, appeared on the coast station's desk. No postmark, no return address, no handwriting match in any record. The station master opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single note, scratched in charcoal black ink on decaying paper. They were not 3, there was always a 4th, watching them. From the inside, silence fell like a shroud over the room. The investigators scrambled fingerprints, none paper too old to trace, ink soaked with salt, not from any pen. The Coast Guard swore no one had delivered it, and the night guards confirmed the gate had never opened. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. When the letter was brought close to a flame, a faint, blurry image appeared beneath the words, a face. Not of Thomas, not James, not Donald. A 4th face, smiling hollow eyes, teeth too long. Watching archivists pulled the original lighthouse photos just to be sure. They had laughed together on arrival. A clear picture of 3 men posing proudly by the tower. But now in the far corner of the frame, a shadow. The 4th shape blurred, almost grinning. It was never there before. The room grew cold. Some say the island didn't just take the keepers, it kept one inside. Or worse, one of them was never human at all, and he had written back. The lighthouse on Eilean Mor was officially decommissioned years later, not due to age or funding, but because of the whispers that refused to die. The government sealed it, declared it off limits, and posted warning signs along the coast. No entry after dusk. But the locals knew it wasn't to protect the island, it was to protect the world from whatever was still inside. To this day, no one dares set foot on Eilean Mor at night. Even hardened sailors, men who've battled hurricanes and stared death in the eye, change course when the island appears on their maps after sundown. Their eyes narrow, voices drop. And some, hands shaking on their mugs, whisper the same thing if you sail near the island after midnight sometimes. You see a light flicker in the tower, but the lighthouse has no power. And worse, sometimes you see a shadow moving behind the glass, but the windows are boarded shut. Yet the reports keep coming. Lights where there should be none, movements in sealed rooms, echoes on empty seas. They say the island still breathes, still watches, still waits, because whatever came to Eilean Mor in 1900 never left.